My daughter once told me that traveling together would help us reconnect. I believed her. That's what makes this harder to say out loud, because on the third morning of our trip to Lisbon, she walked away from me in the middle of a crowded square and never came back. I was 60 years old, standing under the bright Portuguese sun, holding two pastries and a paper bag, waiting for a woman who was already gone. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd flown out of Seattle just 4 days earlier. Madison had called it a healing trip, said it would be good for both of us after a rough few years. I was retired, widowed, and not exactly the adventurous type, but she'd been pushing for more experiences. She handled everything: the tickets, the hotel, even my travel insurance. "Just relax, Dad," she said. "I'll take care of the details." The first 2 days were good. We walked along the Tagus River, ate seafood at a place called Ramiro's, laughed about how I couldn't pronounce bacalao. She was radiant, lighter than I'd seen her in years. I wanted to believe we were healing. I didn't notice the little things that didn't add up, like how she insisted I let her keep our travel documents safe in the hotel room. Safe. Or how she asked me to scan my signature for the senior bus pass renewal back home. I didn't think twice. It was just Madison helping, same as always. That morning we took the tram to Praça do Comércio, one of those postcard-perfect squares with yellow buildings and white archways. Madison handed me her tote bag while she went to find the restroom. "Don't move," she said, smiling. "I'll be 2 minutes." I waited. 2 minutes became 10. I checked the fountain, the cafe, even the souvenir stalls. Nothing. The tote bag felt heavier now. I called her name until people started staring. Then I realized I didn't even have my phone. She'd told me to leave it charging in the room since I had her ESI IMA on my spare phone. By the time I got back to the hotel, my stomach was tight with worry. I asked the front desk if they'd seen her. The clerk gave me that polite look people give when they're trying to figure out how much truth to share. "Your daughter checked out online, sir." About an hour ago, I ran to our room. The safe door hung open. My passport, debit card, and wallet were gone. Her suitcase was missing. My clothes were still in the closet, folded neatly like she'd packed hers quietly while I was brushing my teeth that morning. I called her phone from the lobby. It rang once, then went to voicemail. I opened my email, desperate for a clue. That's when I saw it. An unread message from Soundview Title Services. The subject line said, "Your quitclaim deed document is ready for signature." My heart stuttered. I'd never sold anything. I clicked the link. It opened a DocuSign form dated last week, when she'd asked me to help update your senior paperwork. She'd used my signature, the one I'd scanned for her. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The hotel clerk came over and asked if I was okay. I said something, I don't remember what. But I walked out into the street, holding nothing but a paper bag with 2 melted pastries. I went to the U.S. Embassy the next morning. They confirmed what I feared. My passport had already been reported lost by a relative 2 days before it disappeared. The consular officer tilted her head when I told her my daughter had filed that report. "So she claimed it was lost before it was taken?" she asked. I nodded. "That's unusual." I told myself there had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe someone stole her phone. Maybe she panicked. But deep down, something cold was forming in my chest. Because Madison wasn't careless. She was meticulous. Every itinerary printed, every receipt filed. She didn't make mistakes. That night, I checked my email again. A new notification popped up. New credit inquiry, Soundview title, Tacoma, Washington, my hometown. Timestamped the same day she vanished in Lisbon. It wasn't panic that hit me then. It was realization. My daughter hadn't just left me behind. She'd started something back home while I was still on foreign soil. Something that required my signature. I sat on the narrow hotel bed, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, holding that printout in my hands. I thought of all the years I'd spent saving, repairing that old craftsman house, paying it off, penny by penny. Every memory, Christmas mornings, birthdays, her mother's laughter, was tied to that place. And now she'd found a way to take it while smiling at me over dinner. When I looked up, dawn was seeping through the curtains. I had 24 hours to figure out how to get home with no passport, no cash, and a daughter who wanted me erased from my own life. The embassy opened at 8. I got there at 7:30, heart pounding, holding the only thing I still owned, a printed deed I hadn't signed, and a growing certainty that this wasn't a mistake. When I handed the form to the officer, she scanned it, then looked at me with quiet alarm. "Mr. Davis," she said softly, "this document lists your daughter as sole owner of your house." And right then, something inside me shifted. The father in me broke. The man I used to be woke up. Because if she thought leaving me in another country meant she'd get away with it, she didn't know me at all. I spent that entire morning sitting on a hard plastic chair inside the U.S. Embassy in Lisbon, waiting for someone to call my name. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the kind of noise that eats at your thoughts. When the consular officer finally waved me forward, I told her everything. My daughter took my passport, my card, my money, my house maybe. She listened with that careful calm they train diplomats to keep, then said, "We can issue an emergency passport. 3 business days. You'll need a police report. 3 days. I didn't even have a bed for tonight." She handed me directions to a police precinct and a list of nearby hostels. I left the embassy with 50 euros I'd exchanged at the airport, a half-dead phone, and an ache in my chest that wouldn't quit. I walked through the narrow cobblestone streets, past cafes serving espresso in tiny cups, past couples laughing like life was simple. Everything looked beautiful, but none of it felt real. The Policia de Segurança Pública station was tucked between a pharmacy and a shop selling postcards. The officer taking my report looked young enough to be Madison's son. He typed slowly while a translator helped bridge our languages. "You're saying your daughter stole your passport?" he asked. I nodded. He hesitated before typing again. "You want to press charges, did I? Against my own child?" I looked down at the form, at the empty box waiting for my signature. My hand trembled as I wrote my name. "Yes," I said. "I want this documented." When I left the station, it was nearly sunset. The city glowed gold, the river like liquid fire. I checked into a cheap pension near Rossio Square. 38 euros cash, paid up front. The room was small but clean, with the faint smell of bleach and the sound of traffic filtering through thin curtains. I showered under lukewarm water, lay on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. The embassy said I could email for updates, so I opened my laptop and logged into Gmail using the lobby Wi-Fi. That's when I saw a message from my bank. Account verification request. Boeing Employees Credit Union. It said a new number had been added for security authentication. The name listed was Madison Davis. I clicked the timestamp. It was sent while I was in the embassy that morning. The next email nearly stopped my heart. Home equity line of credit application received. Soundview title, Tacoma, Washington. The same company from that DocuSign email. I clicked the link. It showed a scanned deed with my digital signature, one I'd given her weeks ago for the bus pass. That was no bus pass. Somewhere between heartbreak and fury, something in me clicked into focus. If she wanted to play this game, I'd play it better. The next morning, I went back to the embassy. The same officer helped me fill out another form, this time to freeze my passport number from being used. I asked if they could note it was reported after she left the country. "Yes," she said, typing fast. "That will be in the record." I thanked her, not realizing that small note would later change everything. She gave me 100 euros from the Emergency Assistance Fund and a card for a local shelter. I didn't need pity. I needed a plan. For the next 2 days, I walked Lisbon like a man with blinders. I found an internet cafe, €1 for 30 minutes, and started tracing digital breadcrumbs. Madison's Gmail was still linked to a shared folder from years ago, the one we used to store home renovation receipts. She'd forgotten to unshare it. Inside was a screenshot of a Zillow listing draft for my house, marked "Coming Soon." She was preparing to sell it. I printed everything: the emails, the draft listing, the bank alerts. It cost me €4. I folded the papers neatly, slid them into a folder the cafe clerk gave me, and kept walking until I reached the river. The April air carried the smell of salt and diesel. I watched a plane take off over the water, its landing gear folding in, and thought of her boarding her own flight somewhere, smiling, thinking I'd be stuck here forever. She didn't know her old man used to run job sites, manage crises, solve problems that couldn't wait for miracles. She didn't know I still had fight left. By day 3, my emergency passport was ready. The officer handed it to me with a kind look. "Safe travels home, Mr. Davis," she said. "You'll make it through this." I spent the last of my euros on a one-way flight to Seattle. TAP Air, €570. Middle seat, last row. I tucked the passport into my shirt pocket, close to my heart, and stayed awake the whole flight. Every mile westward built a pressure in my chest that had nothing to do with altitude. When the wheels touched down at SeaTac, rain streaked across the window. Home, my house, my tools, my records, all still there for now. But for how long? At baggage claim, I borrowed a stranger's phone to call my neighbor, Ellen. She'd watched my place for years, fed my cat when I traveled. "Your daughter came by 2 days ago," she said. "She said you were moving into assisted living. She had boxes, movers. I thought you'd arranged it." My knees nearly gave out. "Did she take anything?" Ellen hesitated. "Furniture, paperwork from your desk." She left with a U-Haul. I thanked her, hung up, and stood there in the middle of the terminal, people rushing past me in every direction. By the time I reached Tacoma, the sun was gone, and the house lights glowed through the rain. I unlocked the door with my spare key. Inside, the rooms were half empty. My wife's antique dresser, gone. The safe in my office, open, empty. On the kitchen counter sat a note written in Madison's careful handwriting. "Dad, this is what's best for both of us. You don't need the burden anymore. I'll take care of everything." Now I laughed once, sharp, hollow, disbelieving. Then I folded the note, slid it into my pocket, and looked around at what used to be our home. If she thought I'd just accept it, she'd forgotten who built this place, nail by nail, because I wasn't done yet. And when she walked through that door again, she'd find out exactly what kind of man she left behind in that foreign square. I spent that first night back in my half-empty house, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the note she'd left. The paper trembled in my hands, not because of the draft creeping through the window, but because my heart didn't seem to know whether to break or to harden. "You don't need the burden anymore." That's what she'd written, as if erasing me from my own life was an act of kindness. The refrigerator hummed in the silence. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. Every sound reminded me that this was still my house. My late wife's coffee mugs in the cabinet, the dent in the hallway where Madison crashed her bike at 12, the smell of cedar from the porch I built with my own hands. I walked to my office. The safe was open, emptied except for a few stray papers, my property title, my bank statements, gone. Only a folded envelope remained inside, something she must have missed. I opened it. Inside was the original deed, notarized, witnessed, and untouched. I exhaled for the first time in days. She hadn't filed it yet. That meant I still had a fighting chance. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I want to know how far stories like mine can travel, because trust me, this one's about to get darker. The next morning, I called the Pierce County Recorder's office. The clerk on the line, polite but distant, typed something I couldn't see. "Sir," she said finally, "there's a new deed filed on your property, dated 2 days ago. Quitclaim. Transferring ownership to your daughter, Madison Davis." I gripped the phone tighter. "That's impossible." "I have the original. It's recorded, sir. It lists your digital signature." The words blurred. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there. my digital signature, the one I'd scanned for her bus pass. My stomach turned. That was the seed she'd planted weeks ago. The perfect setup. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat at the kitchen counter, and opened my laptop. I searched my inbox for every message from SoundView title. There it was. Your document has been executed and recorded. Time-stamped while I was still in Lisbon. She'd done it remotely. Remote online notarization. One click, one lie, and 30 years of my life were no longer legally mine. But there was one thing she hadn't accounted for. I was still alive, and I wasn't helpless. I spent the next few hours rebuilding everything she'd tried to erase. I called my bank and froze every account, filed an FTC identity theft report, placed fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus. By noon, I was on my way downtown to meet with an attorney, Ava Park, recommended by a retired neighbor who'd fought a property scam himself. Her office sat on the corner of Pacific Avenue, framed by rain-streaked windows. She listened quietly while I explained everything from Lisbon to the note. When I finished, she leaned back, fingers steepled. "You're not the first parent to be betrayed by a child," she said, "but you might be the first to come this prepared." Ava walked me through my options. File a motion to invalidate the deed for fraud, contact Adult Protective Services, and request a temporary restraining order blocking any sale. It sounded clinical, procedural, but to me, it was a declaration of war. That night, I sat in my car outside the house, watching the rain run down the windshield. The porch light flickered, half burned out. The home I built felt like a crime scene. Part of me wanted to drive away, disappear, let her have it all just to stop feeling this way. But then I remember the day we poured this driveway. Madison was 8, barefoot, laughing, pressing her hand into the wet cement. I'd framed that handprint with wood, sealed it with varnish. It was still there, just outside the garage door. She had already claimed the house, but that handprint reminded me of the truth. It was mine first, and I wasn't going to surrender it to a lie. Over the next 2 days, the investigation began. Ava's office subpoenaed records from SoundView Title. The audit trail showed Madison's laptop had logged in to the notary portal from a coffee shop in Tacoma, 6:17 a.m. Pacific Time. That was noon in Lisbon, the same hour she'd told me she was getting ready for breakfast. The evidence was starting to line up, but so were my doubts. My sister called from Arizona, her voice tired. "You're really pressing charges against your own daughter?" she asked. "She stole my house," I said. "She's still your kid, Tom." Maybe she panicked. Maybe she thought she was helping. "Helping?" I snapped, "by signing my name and leaving me stranded across the world." There was a long silence before she said, "You raised her. Whatever made her think this was okay, part of that came from you. That hit harder than anything Madison had done, because she wasn't entirely wrong." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the years I spent working overtime instead of being home, the birthdays I missed, the resentment that probably grew like mold in the corners of our love. Maybe this was revenge in her mind, just not the kind she'd admit. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, went to the hardware store and bought new locks, security cameras, and a safe. $327.14 paid in cash. As I replaced the deadbolt on the front door, I realized I wasn't just securing a house. I was reclaiming a part of myself I'd lost years ago, the part that believed I could still protect something. Around noon, as I tested the last lock, a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. My heart lurched when I saw who stepped out. Madison, hair tied up, calm, holding 2 cups of coffee like it was an ordinary visit. She smiled faintly. "Hey, Dad, can we talk?" I didn't answer. I just stared at her, at the daughter who left me in another country and still had the nerve to act like this was normal. She glanced toward the door, confused. "Why doesn't my key work?" I looked her dead in the eyes. "Because it's not your house." The smile froze on her face, and for the first time, I saw it, the flicker of fear beneath her confidence. And in that quiet second, I knew the real fight was just beginning. She stood there on my porch, rain dripping from her hair, holding those 2 coffees like some kind of peace offering. "You changed the locks?" she asked, forcing a nervous laugh. "That's dramatic, don't you think?" "No," I said quietly. "Dramatic is leaving your father in a foreign country without a passport and stealing his house." Her face twitched, just a flicker, but enough for me to see the truth in her eyes. The guilt was there, buried under the arrogance. "Dad," she began, stepping closer, "it was just a misunderstanding. I was handling paperwork while you were gone. Things got mixed up. You signed those documents yourself. You can't accuse me of fraud when you literally clicked the button." "Right," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Except the day I clicked that button, I was having lunch 6,000 miles away. Lisbon time. Embassy has the record." For a second she froze. I could almost hear her brain stutter. Then she recovered, the mask sliding back on. "I don't know what you think you have, but you're wrong." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "We'll see about that." Before she could speak again, I pulled out my phone and hit record. "Washington's a 2-party consent state, Madison," I said. "You're being recorded. Everything we say from now on is official." She blinked, realizing the game had changed. "You wouldn't do that to your own daughter." "You did it to yourself," I said. She took a step back, her voice trembling. "You're not well, Dad." "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you don't remember signing things." There it was. The gaslight I'd been waiting for. Classic deflection. It used to work on me when she was a teenager, when guilt made me soft, but not anymore. I handed her a folded copy of the motion to invalidate deed for fraud. Ava Park's letterhead printed neatly across the top. "You'll be served soon enough," I said. Her lips parted in shock. "You hired a lawyer?" "2," I replied. "Ava Park and a private investigator." That's when she saw the camera in the window, the new Wi-Fi cam I'd installed that morning. Her expression cracked just a little. "You think this will hold up in court? You think they'll believe you over me?" "They already do," I said. "You left a trail of digital breadcrumbs a mile wide. The DocuSign IP address, Tacoma, not Lisbon. The notary, Florida, not Washington. The timestamps, all wrong. Every lie you told Madison has a receipt." Her hand tightened around the coffee cup until it buckled. The lid popped off and spilled down her wrist. "You're pathetic," she hissed. "You never trusted me." "I trusted you enough to give you everything," I said, voice low but steady. "And you turned that trust into a weapon." For a long moment we just stared at each other, the father she tried to erase, the daughter who thought she'd won. Then she spun on her heel and stormed down the driveway. "Don't walk away," I said. "You'll want to hear this part." She turned back, furious. "I found the listing," I said. "Your Zillow draft for the house. Your messages to Soundview title. Your little note. List by May 1st. Dad's still abroad. You even included photos from my living room." How thoughtful, her face drained of color. "You went through my files." "I went through the truth," I said. "Something you should try sometime." She didn't respond, just got into her car and slammed the door. The tires squealed as she reversed out of the driveway. I watched her taillights vanish into the rain, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I should have felt broken. Instead, I felt awake. That night, I gathered every document, every receipt, every timestamp Ava had compiled. I laid them across my dining table like a general planning a counterattack. For the first time in my life, revenge didn't feel cruel. It felt clean, like restoring order to a world someone else had set on fire. 2 days later, I sat in Ava's office downtown. She was on the phone with the county recorder's office. When she hung up, she smiled. The kind of smile you only see from people who know they're holding a royal flush. "They froze the title transfer," she said. "Soundview has suspended the deed pending investigation, and we've subpoenaed the remote notary log. The video shows Madison telling the notary, 'Your camera was broken,' so she'd be signing on your behalf. That's fraud. Open and shut." My throat tightened. "So, what happens now?" Ava leaned back in her chair. Now, we let her hang herself. She's already lied on federal documents. Once we file the fraud complaint, the prosecutor's office will open a case. You'll have your house back before summer. That evening, as I drove home, the rain finally stopped. The sky over Tacoma cracked open with streaks of orange. I parked in the driveway, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a while. My house stood solid and still. The porch light glowed steady again like it had been waiting for me. When I stepped inside, the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. I locked the door, tested it once, twice. It clicked shut, final and satisfying. I brewed myself a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and sat by the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, one by one. Somewhere out there, Madison was realizing her little empire was crumbling. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not the kind of smile that comes from joy, but from justice. And just as I took that first sip, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Davis, a calm voice said, this is Detective Ortega, Pierce County Fraud Division. We need you to come in tomorrow morning. We've found something in your daughter's storage unit you'll want to see. My pulse steadied. What did you find? He hesitated. You'll see for yourself. The line clicked dead. I set down my mug and looked at the house around me. Whatever came next, I wasn't afraid anymore, because this time the reckoning was coming for her. The next morning, I drove downtown to meet Detective Ortega at the Pierce County Evidence Facility. The air smelled of rain and diesel, and the sky hung low, heavy with clouds that hadn't decided whether to break. Inside, the building was sterile. Concrete floors, humming fluorescents, a faint tang of coffee and dust. Ortega met me by the sign-in desk, clipboard in hand. Mr. Davis, he said, we went through your daughter's storage unit last night. You're going to want to see this. He led me down a hallway to an evidence room. On a metal table sat 3 plastic bins, each labeled with my case number. He popped one open. Inside was my wife's jewelry box, rosewood carved with her initials. I hadn't seen it since before the trip. He opened the second bin, my bank statements, deed copies, a small black notebook I recognized immediately. Madison's handwriting filled every page, dates, phone numbers, her plans spelled out line by line. At the top of one page it read, transfer deed while dad's abroad. Use Lisbon as distraction. The next page was worse, lists of projected profits, realtor contacts, and a note that said, he'll forgive me once it's done. Forgive? Ortega looked at me carefully. We also found 2 unregistered checks from the title company, one already cashed, one voided after the fraud alert. She was trying to liquidate your home equity line. You got lucky, Mr. Davis Lucky. That word didn't feel right, but I nodded anyway. He closed the bins. We've submitted everything to the prosecutor's office. She'll be facing identity theft, fraud, and attempted theft in the first degree. She's being brought in this afternoon for questioning. When I walked out of that building, the rain had started again. Slow, steady, almost gentle. I drove home in silence, hands steady on the wheel. For the first time since Lisbon, I felt the ground solid beneath me. 2 weeks later, the court hearing was scheduled. Madison arrived wearing gray, her hair tied back, no makeup. I barely recognized her. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her attorney tried to argue it was a misunderstanding, that she'd acted under emotional distress. But the evidence was airtight. Emails, bank logs, video footage, the notebook. When the judge read the verdict, guilty of fraud and identity theft, Madison's knees gave out. Her lawyer had to hold her upright. The judge sentenced her to 3 years probation, 6 months of community service, and restitution. The felony would remain on her record permanently. She'd never work in real estate, never hold power of attorney, never qualify for a professional license again. When the gavel came down, the sound echoed like closure. As we left the courtroom, she turned to me. Her face was pale, her voice barely above a whisper. Dad, I thought you'd understand. I was trying to help us both. I panicked. I looked at her for a long time. You didn't panic, Madison, I said quietly. You planned. And I walked away. That night, I sat on my porch, same seat where I used to drink coffee with her mother. The air was cool, the neighborhood quiet, except for the soft rustle of leaves. My house was mine again, legally, emotionally, spiritually. Every lock secure, every document restored. But there was no victory dance, no celebration, just stillness. The kind of peace that only comes after you've lost too much to feel triumphant. The next week, I visited the county clerk and updated my will. I added one clause. Upon my death, my property will be transferred to the Tacoma Senior Housing Foundation. I didn't want the house to become a weapon again. It would be a home for people who needed one, not a prize to be stolen. Months passed. I heard Madison moved to Spokane, started working at a diner. Sometimes I think about calling her. But then I remember that notebook, the calm precision of every lie. And I tell myself that silence can be love too, love with boundaries. One evening in late summer, I found myself back in the yard, tending the small garden my wife planted years ago. The tomatoes were coming in thick and red, the basil fragrant. Life keeps growing, even after betrayal. That's something no one tells you. You can rebuild, but the new version of yourself never looks quite the same. It's tougher, quieter, but it's still alive. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the sound of a door locking, right? A garden blooming again, a man breathing easy in his own house. Forgiveness, maybe, will come later. But peace, that's enough for now. Have you ever had someone you love cross a line you thought they never would? What did you do with that kind of hurt? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want to hear more stories like this, the kind that remind us how fragile trust can be, don't forget to stay with us. Sometimes the quietest revenge is simply taking your life back.